on today's Story Beat.
There's this whole concept of vertical leadership. I think leadership should be horizontal, that anybody from any level of any group in any company should be able to stand up and has a great idea, is creative, has passion, that we can all follow that person. Because to be a good leader, you also have to be able to be a good first follower.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, actor, writer, director, producer Skip Lackey, started his career as a Ringling Brothers Barnum Bailey Circus Clown after graduating from Clown College. Skip's acting credits include Big River on Broadway, national tours of The Secret Garden, Barnum, Big River, lots of regional theater, and numerous Off and Off-Off Broadway developmental musicals. He also had the distinct honor of spending 2 years with Sanford Meisner in a professional hand-picked acting class. On camera, Skip co-starred in Jim Carrey's first film, Once Bitten. TV credits include The Guiding Light, the miniseries The Blue and the Gray, and host for Nickelodeon's Ace Award-winning Think Fast. He's also been seen in over 100 national network commercials, and he's recorded over 1,000 voiceovers. Skip even spent 3 seasons working as Santa Claus alongside the Rockettes in the Radio City Christmas Spectacular in Chicago. A graduate of the Vancouver Film School, Skip co-wrote, directed, and produced the low-budget feature film Love at Second Sight. He then became executive producer for Kiwazinga, a vision technology company that developed an interactive 36-plus camera system for network broadcast and early internet applications. He's worked with Sun Microsystems, NBC, ABC, ESPN, the X Games, the New York Mets, the Golf Channel, the USGA, the NHL All-Star Game, Nike, the U.S. Navy, and more. He then shifted his focus to giving personal growth and leadership development seminars. Skip has worked directly with over 25,000 clients, taught over 1,000 workshops, and made 1,000 personal appearances. Clients include the IMDb, World Bank for Latin America, and a 2-year leadership development immersion for the Canadian Department of Justice. For the record, Skip and I have known one another for a very long time, both of us meeting when a musical called Papa Bear, Mama Bear played in Little Rock, Arkansas, Atlanta, Georgia, and Off Broadway in New York. While Skip was a teenage actor in the show, I designed the lighting. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a truly great joy for me to welcome to StoryBeat today my dear friend, the deeply multi-talented Skip Lackey. Skip, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. Just so weird to hear your resume, your life be read out, in succession.
Almost like it's over, but it isn't over.
I hope not.
I do too. So let's go back in time just a little bit. Let's look at your history a little bit. You've been at the acting, writing, teaching game for a little while, but at what age were you when the performance bug first bit you?
Gosh, I remember specifically, I was 15 years old. And my grandfather had passed away, and I grew up originally around Washington, D.C., which is where my mom and my family was from, but we moved to Arkansas in the early 70s. So my mother's father had passed away, and I went back to go to the funeral, and I did not want to go to the wake. And so one of my uncle, who was an actor, he's only about 6 years older than me, his friend said, "Hey, I'm going to a musical practice, a rehearsal of Hello Dolly tonight, which I'm in community theater. Would you rather go and just watch the rehearsal?" And I said, anything not to go to the wake. I didn't want to go to the wake. I didn't want to see my grandfather. That was the first time I'd ever had a loved one die. So I didn't want to see him like that. So I was sitting in the audience watching these people perform, and I went, I want to do that. And I had done choir before, right? And I was like, I want to do that. So the next time there was an audition for a show, in high school, I was a sophomore in high school, I auditioned for it and got in it. And that was with our friend Rand Hopkins.
Sure. And Rand was at that time in Little Rock where you were, correct?
Exactly. Right. And he was the director of the Arkansas Arts Center Children's Theater. So after I got cast in that high school show, Rand said, hey, would you come down and audition for some of the shows at the Children's Theater? So that was Oliver. I played Artful Dodger and Oliver. And I mean, that was the bug that just, and that's what I was like, I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Would you say that Rand was perhaps your earliest influence and inspiration at that time?
Oh, absolutely. He was definitely a mentor. He gave us so many opportunities because, as you said, that show that we met on, Papa Bear, Mama Bear, was a new musical. And Rand was writing and getting us to write with him. And so the whole creative process that I was introduced to was collaborative, and it was very flexible. There was nothing, written in stone about it. It was like, let's change stuff on the fly all the time. So I got this great early education in performing because, hell, we would block numbers and 15 minutes before the curtain would go up, and then we would perform them. So it was like being in summer stock all the time.
It was a totally immersive experience, wasn't it?
Oh, it was with him. It was a wild experience. And I owe a lot to him. He really gave me the bug to want to do it professionally.
Well, I've got to say he did the same for me. I don't talk about him all that often because people don't remember him too much unless they were around him. But yeah, he's the one who first really propelled me into doing what it is that we do, which is to perform, to write, to entertain. He was the big influence in my life early on.
When I talk to people all the time about what got you into it, everybody has that person in their life, really, that kind of triggered something, that supported, that encouraged, that gave opportunities to. So many of my friends had the same thing.
It's really hard in life if you don't have that, I think, for almost anything.
Mentors are important. Yeah.
Extremely important. And so those of you out there that are listening that perhaps you have been around for a while, make sure that you help others on their way up. I think that's a good lesson in there. Where did you then continue to train as an actor, as a performer? Was it clown college the next thing that took you that way forward?
Well, yeah, because what we did at the Arkansas Arts Center Theater, all that theater that we did down there, was really no training. I mean, we were taking some dance class, we were singing. It was more just we were learning in the doing. And then my first professional experience was getting out of high school, and I got accepted to Ringling Brothers Barnum Bailey Clown College right out of high school. So I was 17, and they said, 60 people get picked out of about 6,000 that applied. And out of that, they pick a handful of people to go out on the road with them. So I went down there, and it was a 13-week immersion program into clowning, which I already did some clowning and juggled and rode a unicycle and walked stilts and did comedy acrobatics. But I wasn't really a clown per se, like they teach us to be with Ringling. But that was one of the funnest times in my life. And I was actually several of the people that I was in clown college with and then toured with the circus with, I'm still best friends with today. It's almost like going into the Army and you have that intense experience because the circus is 600 shows a year. No, that's not right. It's 300 shows a year. There's 13 shows a week, and you make no money. I was at that time in 1980, I think I was doing 13 3.5 hour shows a week, and I made $155 a week.
That much?
Yeah. And had to pay for my taxes. My room on the train was $10, and all your food had to come.
Oh, they made you pay for the train as well?
Oh, and your food. Yeah. Out of $155. And I was so damn proud of myself, Steve. The first 6 months, I was a cheapskate, right? And I saved $1,000 the first 6 months on the show.
Were you dipping into the elephant's peanuts, or what were you doing?
Well, I was eating a lot of Campbell's soup and minute rice is what I was doing. A lot of grilled cheese sandwiches. That I wasn't eating very well, but Back then, I was bulletproof, right?
So let's
17,
talk
18
about
year old.
clowning for a little bit, because I think that's really interesting that that's sort of an underpinning for, everything else that came after. Not
Oh,
that
yeah.
your lifestyle has been a circus or a clown college, but why did you want to become a clown? Was it because you had had some experience with juggling and with unicycle riding, or did you always want to run away to the circus like the cliche is?
It couldn't be any further from the truth. I had applied to a lot of schools. I wanted to go to an acting program, musical theater program. And all the schools I applied to, I applied late. I was the oldest in my family, and nobody in my family really knew you were supposed to start applying in the fall. So I didn't apply till like March, February. And by then, all these programs were full. And I went to the league I applied to NYU, UCLA, USC, and North Carolina School of the Arts, all these schools. I didn't get accepted in any of them because they were already full.
Right, sure.
So when the circus came around, I was accepted to a couple of small colleges. I started applying to all these women's colleges thinking, well, first off, that could be really interesting to be the only guy at a women's college or a few. And they need men to be able to perform the roles in the shows. So, but they were all full too. Other people had the same idea.
So the circus was it for you then? You turned to the circus.
I turned to the circus, and once I got accepted and I realized how cool it really was, it's the most fun I've ever had in my life on any experience.
So what were the big challenges of being a clown? What was the thing that was like, how do we get through this today? Anything?
Exhaustion, because you live on a room on the train and you're working from the morning till night, basically on Saturday and Sunday. And then on Sunday night, you go back to your room and the train takes off about 1 a.m. and you travel for a day or two to the next location. So, I mean, it was really physical exhaustion, but I was 18, so I had a boundless energy. But it was injury, exhaustion, and I think what really kind of started to set in though was boredom with the performing, because as fun as it was, at that point they were trying to really streamline the show. And so whatever you did when you left winter quarters, when the show first got done, you had to do that over and over and over again for I can't remember if it was 300 or 600 shows. Maybe it was 300. I keep saying 6. I don't know why, but
it was a lot, one way or another.
And if you're a creative force, which we all had been trained to be at clown college, it was rough because we wanted to be funny. We wanted to get laughs, and to do that, we wanted to get laughs from each other. So we were doing stuff and we would get chastised for it.
Did you develop your own routines in the circus, or did they give you the routine?
Some of them they would give you, some of the bigger group stuff. But because I had a creative background, I picked another guy to be my partner, and both of us got cast in this one show. And so we wrote all of our own routines. And so we owned them basically. And to be what's called a 1st of May clown, a first year clown, and to have your own routines was unheard of back then. You were plugged in, but they liked some of the routines that my friend Bob Kramer and I came up with, that they got put into the show immediately, and they got put in really good spots. And we got a lot of crap from it from some of the senior clowns.
What were your favorite things about clowning?
Oh, actually just being able to go up into the stands and make a child laugh, or a child that was scared of you because you're a clown. There's so many people that have all kinds of weird concepts and ideas about clowns, good, bad, or indifferent. But a lot of kids are scared because it's, the makeup and the costumes are bright, they're big, they're loud, and clowns move real quick. So I always made it a point to just get on my knee, stay at a distance, welcome the kids over. My thing that I always tried to do was, I felt like I'd be successful and help build up a child not to be afraid of the next clown if I could get them to touch my great big red nose. And so I would spend all the time I needed, if I could, trying to get that, oh, look, me, and I was successful at it the vast majority of the time.
Well, Stephen King hasn't really helped the clown cause much, has he?
No, he has not. That is that has been the antithesis of what we all tried to do. Yeah.
So you also have been a writer for a long time. Did you train for that, or did you just learn it osmotically by doing it?
It started when we were in high school, and Rand would say, "Hey, go write this scene for something that we were doing." So I got to the point where it was just part of what I did. And then when I had a lot of time, my acting career I was living in New York, and I was doing a lot of brand new musicals, a lot of experimental musicals that they were trying to launch. So I was around a lot of writers and a lot of composers and lyricists. So it was just something that I just found myself doing. And so I didn't write prose. That was not my thing, but I wrote screenplays and I wrote some theater. I never had theater produced, but I did have a couple of films produced that I wrote, low budget stuff, and it was bad.
Do you think of yourself, when you think of yourself in the creative world, as an amalgam of many different disciplines? Do you think of yourself as a performer, as a teacher, as a writer, as an actor, or is it everything?
That's a great question. And I don't have an answer for that, right? I started as a performer, but in performing, I was a clown. I was a host for Nickelodeon. I was Santa Claus. I did Broadway. I did films. I did all kinds of different things. And then I went to film school, and I wanted to learn how to, and so I wrote there. I had a number of projects that I had written that got picked to then be filmed. And if you got your piece picked at the school that I went to, Vancouver International Film School, then you got to direct it. And that's what my heart was really, I wanted to direct. So writing seemed to go hand in hand with directing.
Well, directors are actually writing alongside of the writer, in the sense that they're taking the story that's on paper and also writing further with the live part of it.
Exactly. Writing was just an extension of something that I enjoyed. I really enjoyed it because from an acting standpoint, I understood character development. So often as a writer, or as an actor, you can get stymied by lousy lines that you've got to try to make work and honor it. I remember doing an off-Broadway show one time, and I went to the director and to the writer, and I was like, and I was the lead in this off-Broadway show. No, it was an off-Broadway show, musical about the life and times of Rube Goldberg.
Okay.
It was called Young Rube. And there was a problem with one of the scenes. I didn't understand the transition of me getting in to sing this ballad. And I'm like, the setup is just clunky. And I said, well, what we could do was this and this and this. And the director of it at the time said, Skip, listen, I'm directing, he's writing. If you want to direct and write a show, you need to find one to do it with. And I shook my head and I went, you know what? I'm a prop. Okay. That's how you see me. Okay, great. And you're 100% right. And that's why I ended up going to film school.
Well,
because when he said that to me, it was like the penny dropped and it clicked. And I'm like, oh, you're right. I need to be the creative force behind these projects if I want to get them off the ground.
As an actor, you are essentially an interpreter of the work that's on paper, unless it's an improv thing.
Yes. And if you can't feel like you can interpret it properly, there's a problem.
Huge problem.
Yeah, because it's like you're not connected to the material. Now, the material was good, but there's something in every piece that could always be better if you're in a collaboration.
Sure.
I think I always listen to the actors. I think it's important.
You're not going to get cast in a Shakespeare and change Shakespeare.
No, I wouldn't do that. But or you can't do that if it's a proven project, right? If it's a Broadway show, if it was Secret Garden or Big River or any of those pieces, Barnum, any of those pieces that I did, all that's there. All the movements there. You're a piece of furniture that's moving around on stage, saying the lines and singing, and you do the best you can.
So you have managed to master many different disciplines over time. Do you think of yourself as a master of these disciplines, or do you continue to be a student of it?
Oh, that's a great question. I was working and I had a good professional career in New York and LA as an actor. And I saw myself do a couple of jobs though, and I saw myself on film, and I went, okay, I've got some work I need to do on my craft. So that's when I took 2 years, and I got accepted. I was studying in LA acting at the Neighborhood Playhouse West with a teacher, Robert Carnegie, who was a wonderful teacher of Meisner technique. And I really liked it. I really felt strongly about it. And then on the board in the back of the theater, it said, study with Sandy directly in Bequia, the West Indies. And so at that time, he was in his 80s, and he would run these summer programs, and he would run several of these summer month-long programs, these intensives. And from it, he would pick a handful of group of people to work with for a year or two. And so I thought, well, Bob's great, but why am I not studying with Sandy if I could?
Sandy, for the listeners who don't know, is Sanford Meisner.
Yeah, Sanford Meisner. We all called him Sandy. And so I called his assistant the next day, and I was like, I have to do this with Sandy. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry, we're full for the season. And I said, well, this is the part of me that is, I don't know if it's just pushy, but I was like, no, you don't understand. I have to do this. So I want your address. I'm going to send you a check, and that you can hold on to right now. And at some point, someone's going to drop out. And when they do, I want you to just cash my check. And I don't care if it's a day before people leave. I'll buy my ticket the next day. I'll buy the ticket in advance. I have to be there. And so I went like 10th on the list, unbeknownst to, and I put some extra money on the check. And so I paid a little bit more, I guess, not much. And it was not expensive at the time to study with him. And it changed my life. Those 2 years that I spent with Sandy, I really, for the first time, I felt like you said, master the craft. There's a lot of crafts that I haven't mastered, but at that time, I really felt like I understood my instrument, which was my body and my voice and my emotions, because of the 2 years I spent with Sandy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, his training was fantastic. And to spend that time with him just was phenomenal.
Explain to the listeners who don't know, what are the basics of the Meisner technique?
So, there was Lee Strasberg in the Actors Studio, and there was Sanford Meisner in the Neighborhood Playhouse. They all came out of that Stanislavski method acting, that school, the group theater, right? They had all been a part of that. And Strasberg went west, Meisner stayed east. And the idea, everybody's seen all kinds of things about the Actors Studio. That was what became famous. Meisner's technique his concept was acting truthfully under imaginary circumstances. And the real value to what he shared was, you figure the Actors Studio method acting, they would use experiences that they'd had before, and they would bring that emotion to the moment, and they would use it, which works. It does work. But when you have to do it 8 times a week in professional theater, then you have to keep using real experiences. And after a while, you burn them out. You don't have that many experiences with that intensity to be able to keep that up. Now, Meisner's concept was, if I can teach you how to feel and be present in the moment, you can imagine something, and then you can reimagine it, and it can affect you emotionally. So the different moment-to-moment exercise, and those different exercises, they just built up this facile experience of being able to go from one moment to the next, to the next, to the next. And the truth is, it's not just good for acting. It is one of the best life skills. I use that in my life around emotions and really dealing with the energy of emotion, and the leadership work I did, and the personal growth work that I did, that I taught others, and all the business coaching that I did, teaching people how to use that technique in life. It's one of the best life skills you could ever have.
So you brought Meisner into your personal growth and leadership seminars.
I brought the awareness. I didn't actually teach moment to moment.
You brought the sensibility of it.
100%. I did always. My time with Sandy, if I I mean, I could just sit right now and I get emotional thinking about him, because we were talking earlier about mentors. He was such a gift in my life. And, I'm a perpetual student. I love to learn, right? I am, so when you're like, did I master anything? I don't know. Maybe other people might say that, but I'm a student at heart. And I sat right up next to Sandy on the front row right there. And I wanted to be able to hear every single word. And I didn't want anybody in front of me to distract me from listening to every single word he said, because at the time that I studied with him, he had cataracts. He only could see really out of one eye. He didn't hear very well. He had a hearing aid, and he had a laryngectomy. So he would burp talk.
Wow.
That's how he would get his words across. So every word that he said was measured, it was specific, and it was a gem. And the class that right before the class that I took, there was a writer who sat through the class and wrote a book called Sanford Meisner on Acting, that if anybody has read it, it was written from the class just before the one that I took. So Sandy he influenced my life on all levels. I love that time with him.
So let's talk then about going into personal growth and leadership, which you've done a lot of. Explain for the listeners what that means. What is the concept of personal growth and leadership? Are they the same thing, or are they two different disciplines totally?
Well, they are traditionally looked at as being two different disciplines. Leadership training is one, traditional leadership training. And then there's personal growth work. And that's a big, wide variety of things you can do, from meditation to neurolinguistics programming to yoga to any number of modalities that are out there now. Now, I believe that leadership should be conscious, and it's bringing consciousness into the workplace and bringing emotional intelligence, social intelligence into the workplace, and treating it like the leadership skills should all be personal growth oriented. But we were on the cutting edge of doing that. And we were bringing this seminar. I did this seminar called The Journey for years, which was basically it was a trauma release and healing seminar for being able to find your core, find your center, and recognize who you were at your core, and let go of all the things that surrounded it that had happened to you that could be stopping or blocking you from being able to be your best self. So that was perfect for leadership. And we did it from people that had abuse, that had death and grief and illness. And then we transitioned it over to the leadership work. And it was unbelievably powerful. And so powerful that, one of the things you mentioned in my bio was the Justice Department of Canada overhauled their leadership program. And one of the gals had done one of the workshops with me. And she said, "Can you bring this into leadership?" And I said, "Well, we're already doing it." So they wrote up an RFP, and we sent that in, and we got a 2-year program with them to help them be the core of what was taught to these really key members of Justice Department on all levels. And it was so powerful.
Were they floundering prior to that?
Well, no, I wouldn't say floundering, but they were posturing. Let's just put it this way. The first day of the first class, and there were a number of them with us, they showed up in 3-piece suits, and they were posing, and they were trying to power broker. I do this, I do that, I write the law, I defend the law, I do this. And then by the end of it, they had on shorts and T-shirts and flip-flops, kind of falling into our arms, hugging us, sobbing, saying, "You've changed our lives. You have changed my life with my children, my wife, my spouse, my partner at work. You've changed our office," just from what they learned. And it really only takes one, I think it takes one person in an office that holds a good, strong center as a leader to really allow that kind of energy to just spread throughout an office or a division of some kind.
Wouldn't you say that's true for any organization of any kind that needs one strong core?
Yes. And the further up, the better. But sometimes you have to start from the bottom, and it has to go up. There's this whole concept of vertical leadership. I think leadership should be horizontal, that anybody from any level of any group in any company should be able to stand up and has a great idea, is creative, has passion, that we can all follow that person. Because to be a good leader, you also have to be able to be a good first follower, to be able to say, you know what, that's a great idea. We're all going to get behind this. Or even if you're not one of the main leaders, you can say, I think what, Steve just said is wonderful and I'm on board with it. Steve, what can I do to help you get this throughout the company? I'm right there with you. And when you have that kind of energy and that kind of non-egoic leadership, it transforms organizations.
Even if it starts from the bottom or the middle, not from the top.
It does, yes, because the top, it's hard sometimes, the tip of the spear, unless they've kind of awakened to themselves. It's hard for the tip of the spear to make the change, but sometimes when you have the handle of the spear and everybody's gripping onto that and they're holding strong onto it, then it can help guide the other end of the tip of the spear.
What happens if there's a difference of opinion between that middle leader and the top leader? Does that ever happen?
It happens all the time.
So what happens then?
Well, I mean, if your idea is truly good, or if your energy is truly good, I mean, you can have egoic leadership, or what I also like to refer to as charismatic leadership. So you can have these charismatic leaders, and oftentimes they'll see, oh, there's some energy there. Let's follow that, because people are really responding to it. And you will have some times where things will get shut down. But like there's a friend of mine who was one of the founders of something called Intrapreneur, the League of Intrapreneurs. So it's entrepreneurship in organizations and corporations. So it's how do you think like an entrepreneur in a corporation? So there is the corporate structure is really shifting and has been for a while. And so I think there's a lot of more openings now than there have been in the past, for sure.
Would you say that it's important for leadership to be a good listener?
I think that's one of the most important things you can do to be a good leader, because if you're listening really, really intently and the person feels like you're listening and that they're being heard, the way that they feel is remarkably different than fighting to be heard. And then you could even say to them, well, how does it feel to know that, hey, this is an opportunity? And then that person then gets ignited with energy, passion, and purpose. And so you're creating one at a time. When you listen to people, you're creating these fantastic souls that will go out and be fully engaged. I mean, there is all this data that says that that the Gallup polls have taken that say only out of every 10 people, and this is worldwide, 7 out of 10 are disengaged at work.
That's a lot.
Disengaged. 3 are engaged, 3 are disengaged, and then 4 are actively disengaged, where some people are just showing up to work and they're doing what they're supposed to do, but they don't give you any more. And out of those people, I mean, those are your core workers, but you've got some people, and I think it might be 2 out of 10 that are actively disengaged, that are stealing, that are not working, that are trying to act like they work. So you got 20% of your workforce in a large corporate structure that's not doing anything. And as a matter of fact, they're pulling away from it, so that the 3 that are actually moving the needle are having to fight against the 2 at the bottom of the spectrum that are actually pulling away from it.
So that's really important, that a good leader then helps to guide those people to no longer being disengaged. Isn't that the goal?
Well, it is the goal. And if you think about, out of 10 people, 3 are actively engaged. What would happen if you got 4 engaged, or 5 or 6? Are you going to get everybody engaged? Maybe some did. I mean, there are Jack Welch, right, at GE. He did a thing leadership-wise where the bottom 10% of the performers, and they did metrics. If you were at the bottom 10% every year, you were fired. You were let go. So wow. That gives you a lot of impetus to try to perform. And I think there's a lot of bullshit performance that goes on too, and it's a lot of posturing, potentially stealing. It's not a good thing to do. But then you hear, historically, Steve Jobs, right? Pushed people to go beyond their limits. The same thing with Elon Musk. And that's why these companies thrive, because they wouldn't take no for an answer. We can't do that in this time frame, this way.
Let's talk about an Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs for a moment, because both of them have, well, Jobs had and Elon Musk has a reputation for being a little bit brusque and a little bit tough on people. Is that a good quality in a leader?
Well, you have to have a very specific. Now, we're opening up a can of worms around personality types.
Sure.
Right. There's something called the Enneagram. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Steve. It's a personality typing modality that allows you to see really how people are hardwired to react and respond. It's one of the things that we teach in our leadership program, but in life, it's one of the best personal growth tools that I think anybody could ever learn. And
so explain it to us. Explain what the Enneagram is.
It's a big teaching that says you land and when you're born, you kind of aim in one of 9 directions. There's a triangle in the center of an Enneagram, which is a 9-sided model, and that you've got these 3 core emotions, mind, and body types. And out of that, each one of them has 3 types that move towards, away, and against. So it's a very, I can't go into the big part of the model, but
sure.
What I can say is when I first started learning about this, about myself, about my family, about other people, my girlfriends and partners, and what I learned is everybody is hardwired to react and respond a certain way, and everybody falls into these being a chapter in a book on some level. And what I realized is when I really honestly looked at it and went, oh, all that stuff that happened, it's not personal. They were kind of hardwired to react and respond like that. I thought it was personal towards me. It's not. So from a leadership standpoint, if you recognize and you can shortcut that, then you can go, however anybody responds, it's not personal. And if you're in the middle of the company and you're looking up and you see the way that the leader is responding and you know what their Enneagram point is, it's like, it's not personal. They're just doing what they're hardwired to do.
Is that something that you down here can make a determination about of a person? You can figure out what their Enneagram is?
If you understand the models well enough, you certainly can. So, for instance, I'm working in an organization right now, and I've got this, the owner of this organization, great guy, and he's what's called an 8 on the Enneagram, which is the challenger, the boss, the leader, right? Well, my father was that point, and over the years, I've worked with so many people that have been that Enneagram point. I know how they react and respond, and they have a tendency to be very passionate, and they get all worked up really quick over things, and they can raise their voice and they can say things. But these people, it's their fallback. When they get under pressure or stress, they go right into this behavior. And when they do, and when he does, or when other people in my life have always done that, I've gone, wow, okay, it's not personal. I don't have to get pulled into that energy right now, because it's not going to serve anything or anyone for me to get pulled into it too. So because of that, he and I have a great working relationship, and he respects me, but it took a while to earn his respect. And that is, when I worked with Kay Wazingo, one of the partners in the business, was an 8, and it took him about 9 months of me being the executive producer and working with him side by side. And it was one time he said, you know what, I trust you to do this. And then I was like, bing, okay, that was the magic word for that Enneagram point, trust, and trusting me. And then after that, we were inseparable, and we worked really well together because he understood that I was there to make him look good too.
Well, once he believed that you were doing what he needed you to do or wanted you to do.
Right. Because at that point I was the executive producer, but I was running the production for that experimental camera technology. And one of the owners was jumping in, and we were doing it together. But I could tell for a long time, he just didn't trust that I was going to do it. He'd probably been let down on a million different projects. And once he did, we started working, and we were inseparable. And it was like he treated me like a brother and a partner. And that was that's that leadership. And we did great things together because we were passionate, and we never said can't do it. We said yes to everything, and we did it. We pulled it off. Yeah.
Can leaders be made, or is it have to be somewhat of a natural thing?
No, I believe 100% that leaders can. It can be something that can be taught, and it comes with emotional intelligence. It comes with being able to be in the moment, be able to be a good listener. You brought a lot of this up, and understand how human behavior, and that it's not personal, and also to be able to be resilient and have a lot of grit in times when challenges show up. There's a wonderful book called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. I've read that book 2 or 3 times, and it's a simple book. I think everybody that's in leadership, everybody that's in this business should read it, because obstacles come up all the time in different projects that we're trying to do. And it teaches you how to go, okay, so that happened. What are we going to do about it? So you don't get upset about it. You don't throw in the towel. You just go, okay, so that happened. What are we going to do? And on different jobs, I've seen that happen again and again and again and again, where something happens that's out of your control. That's going to happen. And how you respond is how successful you're at down the line.
So you, not only are you a leader, but you also then did something on top of it, which is to teach leadership, which is a different skill set. Teaching something is different than doing something. And so I'm curious, in your ability to communicate this to people, did you use your skill sets from being an actor in bringing your teaching forward? In other words, were you able to use your ability to perform, so to speak, as a teacher? Was that useful?
Yes. All right. So I've been in front of over 1 million people live.
Wow. That's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people over the years. And I kind of roughed out, if this many people, this many shows. And one of the things I realized is what had brought me to the fact that I was a good leadership teacher and a personal growth teacher was I had had so many different experiences in so many different ways. And I had pivoted so many different times throughout my life. I had a story to tell about just about every kind of situation that could have come up. So yes, I got to one point and one day I was meditating and I went, wow, how did I get from there as this kid from Arkansas growing up who didn't want to see his grandfather, in a casket, to being, standing in front of tens of thousands of people and being, this teacher. And I realized that what it was is everything I'd learned along the way, which was story structure, how to tell a story, how to communicate it, how to be in the moment, how to listen to when something is said by somebody in the audience, how I could then make people laugh and be goofy enough, like the clown, bring in the clown and the physical comedy that I would with the storytelling and the writing, with that, the story beats that you're having to do. And I could do it. I could create what was called a nested loop. And that was, I learned from Tony Robbins. I was at Tony Robbins' first seminar in New York when he was 23 years old, 24, and I was 23. And he would do this teaching where he would tell these stories and he wouldn't finish them. So they keep you hanging there. And then he would come back and he would wrap them all up. So unconsciously, I learned that by watching him so many times, because I staffed for him on, I don't know how many events when I was younger. And, he convinced me that I could walk on fire, walk across a bed of red hot coals. Well, I did it, 60, 80 times. And if you can do that, what else can you do that you didn't think you could do? Right. So all of these skills, everything that I had learned from the production and being able to put on theater and film and direct, and that's what I was putting on these seminars to help people be their best self. So everything that I'd learned, and I believe this, everything that we ever learn can be a skill that you can bring back as a skill set to share with other people.
I think that's exactly right. And I think that it's always amazing to me. It's fascinating how people go through life sometimes having no plan at all. and they bump along and bump along and bump along. And then suddenly everything that they've learned comes into play on something that they finally focus on.
Yes. And that's what it felt like for me. I mean, my personality type is the Peter Pan, right? So I'm more new and different. So I went from circus to Broadway to film, television. I started writing. I went to film school. I was directing. I was hosting TV shows. And in the meantime, I owned a restaurant that would hold 800 people. And I had a production company. And then I went after film school, directed a feature that I wrote and starred in, and that got released, and a couple of other ones. And then I took this job as this producer and worked all over the United States with all the networks, and and doing it at a really high level. Somehow I became this vision technology expert because no one had experience in the field, and I was doing it 6 days a week, 10 hours a day in the studio and figuring this stuff out. But I'm like, I always, people would say, well, how did you learn all this? I was like, geez, I trained at clown college, for God's sake. Anybody can learn this if you're really passionate about it. If a clown can do it, anybody can do it. I used to say that all the time.
Especially if a clown can do it.
Yeah. And that was, 45 years ago that I did that, but I did clowning. But that sense of humor with everything that I do just is a flavor in everything.
Well, I think the key, and you correct me if you think I'm wrong, the key in the hub of it, in the core of it, is that you are at heart a storyteller, that you know how to tell a story, and that becomes valuable because then you can communicate those thoughts to people. If you didn't have that ability, it would be a lot more difficult.
Anybody that teaches is a storyteller. And I'll take it one step further. You're selling. Anybody that sells anything is a storyteller because you're weaving a story around. And I believe we're all salespeople at heart, especially in this business, in the entertainment industry. I mean, I have gotten to the point where I said, people would say, well, what do you do best? And I'm like, well, I kind of sell because I understand how to tell a really good story. And when you can tell a story from your heart and honestly tell it, it inspires people to take action. And what better gift could you have in the world, if you're not going to be in front of the camera or up on stage telling these stories that other people have written and you're interpreting it. But if you're going to be a teacher, a writer, I mean, that's the reason I started writing, is because I wanted to make a difference in the world. I wanted to actually tell stories that would inspire people. So they were messages of redemption, of forgiveness. I wrote one of the screenplays that I wrote was about the Holocaust. I'm not Jewish, but I remember hearing a thing when I was in my early 20s that said, and this was in like USA Today, 50% of all high school seniors believe that the Holocaust was a hoax. And when I heard that, it literally hurt. It hurt me that was even in consciousness in our world at that time. And this would have been in the 80s. And I don't think that number is still the same. But I mean, gosh, everything is about telling stories.
But that's because those people that believe that have been told a different story.
That's exactly right. And they believed them because somebody else's narrative was so believable and powerful.
And no one was counteracting it.
Nobody was counteracting it. Right. There was a limited amount of information, and there weren't enough people that were educated or understood or read or had ever met somebody that was in the Holocaust. So they didn't have that same story that I did, where I knew that couldn't be true. So you're right. Through time, everything's about telling a story.
Including being a good leader, isn't it?
Well, leadership is really spinning a story. What it is, it's your mission, your vision, and your values, your MVV, right? Mission, vision, and values. So you spin this story about, here's our mission. This is what we're trying to do. Here's our vision. This is how we're going to do it. And here are our values. And this is our rock. These are our 10 commandments that we're going to live by to get to that mission and our vision. So yes, everything, leadership is all about storytelling. It all ties in. It all ties in.
And I can tell at this point, you have been doing this for so long that it's very much ingrained in you, that you have all of the thoughts and processes that you go through already ingrained in you. But when you first started doing it, how much of this did you have to memorize? Or did you have it on cards? Or how did you present your seminars? What did you do?
Gosh, that's a real interesting question. Yes, it is who I am now. And everything I do comes through my filter of my experience.
Sure.
Right. And I think we all do that. Right. So like if I'm right now, I'm working at a company and I'm helping this company grow through selling construction projects. What do I know about construction? But I have a 95% close rate. 95%. The industry standard is 35. Where does that come from? It comes from I started telling stories to the potential clients that they went, oh, and I educated myself on potential answers to questions that they might have. So I would go out and watch other people that sold and said, ooh, that's a really good story that's a good story. This really, and I gathered up a basket of good stories to be able to tell. And then when I started doing it for a while, then I had my own story. What I would do is I would write a script. Basically, I wouldn't write it out word for word, but I would say, I'm going to tell this story. I'm going to tell that story. I'm going to tell this story. And then we're going to do this exercise. And then we're going to have this experience. And so those were the beats the story beats, literally, that I was going to use in the
Thank
seminar.
you very much.
Yeah. A little promotion. And with those beats, then you can build the structure of the larger experience. And then as time went on, you gather up nice little subplots and sub-stories as you started teaching it, and then you'd add to it. So at first it would be, say it was the day would be 6 or 7 hours. 10 years later, the day is like 8 or 9 hours because there's so many good things and little moments that you found that you want to share that it made the experience so much richer.
Would you say that your experience as a director also comes into play in managing people or organizations or teaching? How does the directing part of your experience also take part in this?
Well, it's interesting because when I directed, I also oftentimes would act. So I would have to be able to do a scene sometimes and then watch myself do the scene, disassociate from it to actually go, was what I just did any good? Do we need to shoot that again? So what I got really good at was in the moment is being able to take stock in, is what I'm saying moving people? Is this being successful at what I'm trying to do? So I would get to the point where I would start to then, what's the right word? Self-calibrate, and I got to the point where my calibration was really clear because I was speaking and teaching, but I would also ask questions, or I would say, does anybody have a question? And from those questions, if you really listen and then say, did I answer your question? Not some bullshit answer where they're not getting their question answered because the person doesn't really have an answer. I wanted to answer the question. So, and I would calibrate that way. And then it got to the point where it just became a natural part of the process.
So you could actually view yourself from, I guess, from afar or from above and tell whether you were doing something that was helpful or it wasn't helpful.
Well, there were times when I was doing these personal growth classes and people would get triggered. They would get triggered. I'd say something and they would respond in a maybe not as elegant way as they would have liked to have. And I would find myself getting triggered back and wanted to defend myself. And I would have to stop and go, this is the antithesis of what I'm trying to teach from a leadership perspective. Be still, breathe, okay, and say, okay, and be honest and be vulnerable and say, Steve, when you just said that, it triggered me. And I felt myself get defensive and I felt hurt. And I'm not sure that that's what you meant to do. Maybe it was, but I don't think at your core that's who you are. So give me 1 second to get really still and give you an honest response rather than an egoic response. And I'll be honest with you, people would respond, they loved it because it was the truth. I mean, I was speaking the truth. I always did.
I love what you just said a moment ago about that you had to stop and breathe. I think that that's something that's taken me a long time to practice, to understand, to know that when I get triggered, when I'm upset by something, that the smartest thing for me to do is to step back and take a deep breath and just let the air flow through. I think there's something very important to that. Is that truly something that leaders can use too?
Well, I think that leaders, if they're orators and are speakers, they need to learn how to use their breath and breathe properly, because you can control a room by just getting everybody to be breathing at the same pace and tempo. And it's possible to do that consciously and unconsciously. But you can, I want to say manipulate, that's not the right word, but you can control the room by doing that and taking certain pauses. And I've learned from watching some of the best speakers in the world get up and speak, where they say something or somebody asks them a question, and rather than immediately just coming back, they calibrate to what the question was. They settle in and go, you know what, let me think about that for 1 second. And they just take a breath and they let the entire room catch up to them. And they take this big pause. And then they come out and they say, what this does is this brings up this to me. And they tune in. And I think that is true leadership. I think that's so powerful. I would watch Steve Jobs do that when he would give his things, when he would come out with these new products. Yes, he had it down, but there would be times when he would take questions from the audience and he would walk for a second. He would pace. And I've read a lot of stories about him, but I admired his creativity and his creative process beyond words. It's a beautiful process. I mean, you watch Barack Obama, who I thought was a good orator, but he would take these pregnant pauses between words too. And after a while, it got to be a little much, but he would pause when he would be asked a question. And I think a lot of good speakers do that, especially a lot of good leaders, because they don't want to just give the rote, oh, this is it, and something falls out of their mouth and it's diarrhea. They really want to, okay, how can I use this answer to actually create a different space, to move people, to share the mission, to bring more people onto the mission by talking about, see, I think one time I was doing some work with my friend Rick Lewis, right? Rick. So he was going into a lot of Fortune 100 companies and doing this, it was a comedy act, but it really was something called the 7 Rules You Were Born to Break. And it was a wonderful teaching platform. And we were in this multi-billion-dollar company in San Francisco. And they were saying, oh, our employees are not doing this, this, and this, and this. And I said to the group, I said, well, what's your mission, vision, and values? I can't actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I can't remember where I said it or Rick said it. One of us said it. And they went, oh, and it was the CEO, the COO, the CFO, the CMO, the CIO. They were all there. And none of them could remember what their mission, vision, and values were. And the CEO finally said, oh, it's down in the hallway at the bottom of the 45-story building, and it's on a plaque there. And our statement to them was, okay, so your employees are not doing what you want them to do, but you haven't told them what you want them to do because you don't even know what your mission, vision, and values are. You should always use every opportunity as a leader to bring it back to those core tenets of who you are and how you're going to do it, and at what level are you going to do it at.
That's where businesses fall apart, is when they stop following their mission.
Absolutely. And it's such a simple practice. Hey, Mike, I appreciate the way that, one of our values is to always act with integrity when no one's watching. And, Bob, your division chief told me about the way that you did this on your own without being told. And so you're following our values. And I greatly appreciate that. You are a model in this company. I mean, how does that make somebody feel? It makes them feel like they're $1 million.
Right.
And it's so simple. It's so simple.
But a lot of people in business don't do these things because they have no concept of it, nor have they been trained in it, and they don't realize what's going on.
Well, they just don't understand the importance of it. And, people they're going through and getting their MBA, and they're cramming for tests. But the actual getting your master's in business, I think it should also come in hand with leadership, because, you can be smart and have a lot of business sense, which I have studied like crazy. My daughter, my 18-year-old, well, she turns 18 in a few days, she wanted to be a teacher, and which I thought was very honorable. And I said, what kind of teacher you want to be? And she goes, I want to teach fine art, and I eventually want to be a principal. And so she's double majoring in education and in leadership. It actually, she said to me, Dad, it's a really small program. It's so small that the dean of that division invites everybody in the group over further home, because it's only about 130 people. And this is at a university. It's got 40,000 students. So it's not something that a lot of people are doing, but I'm thrilled that she's doing it.
Sure.
Because I have told her since she was a child, and that's part of, can you raise a leader? Absolutely. Both my kids are leaders, all three of them, but my younger two, definitely. But my youngest, my 13-year-old, is at a leadership camp right now, a Rotary club called Young Leaders. And it's a free class that they put on out here for 8th graders.
That's great.
Kids going from the 7th and 8th grade. So yeah. So leadership is a big part of our whole family and what we believe in, and, step up and take the lead, because if you don't do it, no one else is going to.
So I have been having the most fascinating conversation with my old and very dear friend, Skip Lackey, and we're going to wind the show down a little bit. And I'm just wondering, you have clearly been doing this for quite some time, and you've worked and met with lots of humans, as you say, 1 million people you've been in front of. So surely you must have a story that you can share that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or just plain funny.
Yeah. When I did my first movie, I was, as you said in the bio, I did Jim Carrey's first film, Once Bitten, with Lauren Hutton and Cleavon Little, and I co-starred in that with him. And there was a nude scene in the movie, and this came out in 1985. I don't think this movie would fly today, because it was a little. I mean, I guess it would. There's still some stuff that's out there like it, but. So when we were in rehearsals, this was Jim's first movie. It was my first film. We went to Howard Storm, who was the director who had directed all the Mork and Mindy's. He said, "Oh, we're going to give you these little socks to cover up your penis when we do the nude scene." And we were like, "Oh, okay." And so it was the day that we were going to shoot it. And it was in this high school gymnasium locker room in the shower. We had a shower scene. And so we walked in, and the person who was in charge of the costume said, "All your stuff is laid out." And when we went there, it was a robe and a towel, nothing else. And we went, "Hey, what happened to the little, the sock?" And the woman who was in charge of all the wardrobe said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And so we went to Howard. The three of us did. There were three. The other character that played the co-star with me, we were like, his two best friends went, "Howard, what happened?" And he goes, "Oh, come on, guys. I was lying to you. There's no sock. You can't do that. We're not going to see anything anyway. Just man up, be a man, And he goes, "Once you're naked for 2 minutes, you're not going to bother you anymore anyway." So we were filming these scenes, and
is this with Jim Carrey? Is Jim Carrey
this with Jim Carrey? And Jim, I'm grabbing Jim from behind, and we're naked, and I'm holding on to him, and the other guy's trying to look for a vampire bite. Right? It was a vampire movie, comedy vampire movie, and he's got his legs spread, and so we had filmed it a whole bunch. And Howard was right. Once we filmed it a few times, you were like, "Yeah, whatever. I'm naked. Who cares?" I really didn't care. None of us did. Well, Samuel Goldwyn Jr. walked in to the scene, and it was a closed set. But after a while, all of the male and female members were all on set. Samuel Goldwyn Jr. walked up, and we were naked. And he walked over to Jim, and he goes, "Hey, Jim, how are you?" And Jim stuck his hand out like really big, and Sam kind of reached across, grabbed Jim's hand, and Jim pulled him right up against him. I mean, right up against him. And his face was just squirming, because Jim was naked. We were all naked. And the crew started laughing. And then Jim just took his midsection and started flapping his thing back and forth, almost like one of those little toys and Sam was trying to let go, and Jim is going waka 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 waka, and that it's that kind of stuff. I knew that Jim Carrey was going to be a huge star because he entertained us all always.
Well, this was before he was well known, right?
It was his first film. He had done the Duck Factory, I think it was called. It was a failed TV program.
That was it. Yeah,
that was it. And this was his first movie. First anything. And but everybody had seen his brilliance, and to this day I still can see it in my mind, and we hysterically laughed. Sam trying to put his head away and not look as Jim was just doing that. Yeah, there were lots of stories along the lines like that of funny things that happened, either in production or there was a time when I had this camera technology, and there were 36 cameras that we could stop time and move in time and space. So you could go through the 36 cameras, and we would also create 1,000 camera positions in between them with this flow field data that these 18 patents would create virtual cameras. And we got hired we were doing the X Games, Summer and Winter X, and we got hired to do the NHL All-Star Game. So I showed up at the Staples Arena to hang this thing, and ABC and ESPN had not told anybody we were there to do it. And where we were going to get hung, they had already planned lighting and all of that. So it was like one of those things you're like, okay, so what are we going to do? So we had to work all night. We couldn't work during the day because there was stuff on the ice, and we had to work all night. We'd come in at midnight and work till like 7 a.m. And, you just made stuff work. You made it happen.
That's how it is in show business, isn't it? You just make stuff work.
Just make it work.
Because it's often one-off. It's often there's no other thing that you're ever going to use something for. Now, in the case of Kewazinga, you probably used it in many different applications, but each application would have been a little bit different, yeah?
Every single one of them was different, and every single one of them presented their unique challenge.
No doubt. So last question for you today, Skip. You've already given us just a huge amount of very valuable and wonderful advice all throughout this whole show, but I'm wondering, do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you like to give to those who are just starting out either in show business or in leadership or whatever it would be, or someone who's in a little bit and trying to get to the next level?
Yeah, we kind of talked about this earlier, which is look for mentors, look for people that are in front of you. Those people will help shortcut your process. I've had a number of mentors, and early on, I had a mentor that said, get mentors. And there was a gentleman, Robert Pasola, who was the dramaturg at Circle in the Square that I met. He was directing a show that I did, and he and I became friends. And we would meet once a month, and I would buy him lunch, and we would sit at a restaurant for 2 or 3 hours. Did this for years. He passed away. He was actually one of the first recorded cases of HIV over in England, he and his partner. But Robert, we had this most unique friendship, and he gave me such good feedback over the years. So I really try to help people when I can. I literally, how I got one of my first breaks in theater, I went to a casting director's office. I didn't know any better. They opened up the door and said, hey, we'd like to audition for Barnum. We're clowns with Ringling. We were in the circus at the time, and the casting director went to shut the door, and I literally stuck my foot in the door. I mean, in the story, and said, no, you don't understand, and ended up getting cast in the show. If you don't know better, just be willing to think outside the box. And there are two other pieces of wisdom. I had a teacher when I was studying to be on soap operas. I was studying soap opera acting because it's a very specific style. And he said to me one time, he said, Skip, what are you trying to accomplish with this character? This is before I took acting with Meisner. And I said, well, when I read this, I thought the character was such and such. So when I'm doing this, I'm doing it like this. And he goes, you know what? There's always going to be somebody that's going to be a better character actor than you. And he said, if I can give you one piece of advice, just be the best you that you can be. Take your style, how you do things, and just do what that is, because you might not be right for that specific role. But first off, the casting director, the director, one of the producers will remember you if you were just being the best you that you can be. And they'll see somebody pretending to be you and say, you know who we really need for this is Skip. Call him in. And here's an example of that, Steve. So when I go on an audition, didn't know what it was for, and I get put on tape, it was for this movie. The script said Back to the Future. So it was for the Michael J. Fox role. Michael J. Fox was not cast in it. I was the New York choice and flew to LA to audition for the lead in Back to the Future. Steven Spielberg flew in, and Robert Zemeckis were there, and they read me for about an hour through all these scenes. And I was always an actor that loved to get feedback, and I could shift things. And when I was working, I said to both Zemeckis and Spielberg, what can I do? Is there anything I could do differently? And they both said to me, and I realized it was a huge compliment, Skip, I don't want to give you any direction because what you're doing is so uniquely you and different, and I don't want to mess up your performance. And then when I screen tested and did all the tests with, Crispin Glover, Leah Thompson, and Christopher Lloyd, we did all these screen tests. Zemeckis said the same thing. I don't want to give you any feedback that might take you in the wrong direction because I love what you're doing and it's uniquely you. So at first I didn't know what to think of that, but then I realized later that you couldn't be any different because there's so many people that are trying to find their own style or their own who they are. And apparently I had stumbled upon it at some point and was doing a good job of just being me. And I was the second choice for so many different things along the way. Me and Woody Harrelson for that role on Cheers and so many different films that I was so close to. But I knew that what I was doing was right because directors were pulling me aside, casting directors pulling me aside going, don't stop. You've got something really unique. It's just a matter of time. There was a director one time that said, look, everybody will get some kind of shot. If you're really talented, you'll get the opportunity of doing it again and again. So what's here for you? What is it you really want? Me, I just wanted to tell stories and I wanted to work. I didn't care whether it was theater, if it was film, if it was producing. I just wanted to be a part of something that was telling stories. And we told stories with that vision technology. It was a really cool story that we had. We went out and sold it over and over and over again to all kinds of different opportunities to share that. They're still using that technology on TV now. I see it in football games and some basketball games, some hockey stuff. And we were way ahead of our time. So don't be afraid to pivot. Don't be afraid to get mentor. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know, and ask questions. And be the perpetual student. You don't have to have it all figured out. And people like to be around people that are nice. So if you are likable, you're probably going to get more work because you're easy to work with. Show up on time, know your lines, be a nice guy, and be willing to do whatever's necessary.
Well, all that's extremely valuable advice, because people who are starting out frequently think that they have to do something different than just being the best that they can at what they know how to do.
Be the best them that they can be. Be the best you.
Skip Lackey, this has been a fantastic hour plus on StoryBeat today, and it was great seeing you and talking to you, and I can't thank you enough for spending your time and your wisdom with all of the listeners today on StoryBeat.
Thank you for inviting me on, Steve. We go way back, and what a thrill it's been to kind of reconnect, especially around this, and to be able to share whatever wisdom, I guess, that I have. It's been a real joy, and you're a wonderful interviewer. Really enjoyed the conversation that we had.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.